Hey, good morning, everybody. Mr. Cantrell here. Hope everybody's enjoying your snow days so far. Of course, it's about 8:45 at my house. I'm sure you're getting up a lot later than this. Today's lesson, not only do you need to listen to this video, you need to watch the Georgia story that I've got posted in the module on Henry Grady as well in order to be able to do well on the 10-question quiz, which is the last thing that you need to do for my class today. So if you didn't watch the Grady video first, make sure you watch that when you get done with the lesson here. All right, today's lesson is introducing the New South era, which is going to be the era right after Reconstruction. It starts in 1877. This module is going to run until 1918, right until the United States gets involved in World War I. This is a standard. And one concept I need for you to know before we get started is the concept of the New South. The picture up in the upper right-hand corner of this slide is Henry Grady, who was, as you should have known from the Georgia story, a newspaper editor. He was the spokesperson of the New South. He actually came up with this idea of the New South. He wanted to lure investment. He wanted to bring northern investment to the state. And to do this, he spoke of a South that had gotten away from the ideals of secession and slavery, and it was a South that was ready to move forward as far as an industrial plan and that type of thing. So what we've got on here is after the Civil War and Reconstruction ended, Atlanta began its rise from the ashes, became one of the more important cities in the South, if arguably not the most important city. Henry Grady came up with the International Cotton Exposition, which we're going to talk about in a minute. He wrote of the New South as one that was industrial and self-sufficient. Entrepreneurs, both black and white, developed new services and products in this New South. The first concept the next concept we're going to talk about this morning is that of the Bourbon Triumvirate. These were actually a group of three politicians, Joseph Brown, Alfred Colquitt, and John Gordon, who kind of traded off being Georgia senators and Georgia governors, and were basically dominating Georgia politics for a period of 20 years. The name actually comes from a line of French kings called the Bourbons. So these guys actually, well, to put it mildly, thought so much of themselves that they just decided to name themselves after a line of French kings, and they actually really, it says, dominated Georgia politics for more than 20 years. The people who were their proteges that came up after them that they trained, really you could argue that their outreach went a lot further than that. They were all very powerful. Joseph Brown being the governor during the Civil War, they fought during the Civil War. All three wanted to build the railroad and mining business in Georgia. One of their big flaws is that they really wanted to bring this antebellum planter class back, which means they really wanted to bring kind of the plantation system back. So they were really more concerned with the wealthier Georgians. They weren't concerned about the white people, be they black or white. Pictures of the Bourbons, you can see two of them rocking the beard, especially Joseph Brown up there on the upper left. Bourbon Triumvirate, the men were white supremacists. The three members also supported and took advantage of the convict lease system, which was the system of leasing convicts to business owners, who in turn would provide housing, food, and clothing for convicts. It would not have been an appropriate amount. They would have been very much mistreated. Their power decreased as the ideals of the Populist Party and the New Democrats began to dominate the Democratic Party in 1890, as well as the deaths of the three men. So we're going to talk about the Populist Party a little bit later on in the module, not today, but that was a party that was actually concerned around being there for the regular people. They were concerned. The Populist Party thought that the wealthy businesses such as the Carnegies and the Vanderbilts and the railroad business had become too much in charge of American politics, and they wanted the power to go back to the people. And we had a Tom Watson, prominent Georgian, who was actually kind of a bigwig in the Populist Party, whom we'll talk about later in the week. Historians have contemplated that the Bourbon Triumvirate was not a cohesive unit. It was always thought of that these guys were, the three musketeers, the three amigos, but there's actually some evidence now that they actually was a good bit of infighting and had different views, a strong dislike for one another, being three people that wanted to be in charge. They just did not see eye to eye. Joseph Brown, I'm not going to go into a lot of the details. They're on the PowerPoint if you want to go in, and especially for your projects, dig a little bit more. Just a couple of things that would remember. Joseph Brown was the governor throughout the Civil War. He attended Yale Law School. You can get see some more of the details here. During the war, he argued with President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, things like that. Alfred Colquitt, born in Walton County, Georgia, just down the road from us. He attended Princeton, returned to Georgia afterwards to become a lawyer, served during the Mexican-American and the Civil War, eventually served as Georgia's governor and Georgia's senator. John B. Gordon, he attended the University of Georgia. He did not graduate. His came from a family who was in the coal mining industry, and he was in that. He kind of made his, I guess, fame known because of his fearless fighting style. When he fought in the Civil War, he was promoted very quickly. He did not take fear into battle. After the war, Georgia is thought to have become the leader of the Georgia chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. He also served as senator. He had some scandal as far as some of his business dealings, and was also a governor and a senator. Henry Grady, he was born in Athens, Georgia, is best known for his ongoing promotion of the New South. He served as editor of the Atlanta Journal. This probably needs to be Atlanta Constitution. Just know that he was the editor of the Atlanta paper. He used the paper as a stage to promote his views concerning industrialization of the South. Back during this newspaper era, a lot of the editors would actually write what was called editorials, which wasn't necessarily reporting news like we, want them to do today. It was actually more of their opinion going in there. So he would write essays and such about this New South that had gotten away from slavery, that had gotten away from gotten away from secession, and he used it to lobby Northern investors to help financially in these causes. He is given credit for being instrumental in bringing the International Cotton Expositions to Atlanta. There were 3 of them. Ironically enough, being an Athens-born graduate of the University of Georgia, with their School of Journalism being named for him today, he was instrumental in the role of creating Georgia Tech. He was active in local politics. They talked about the Atlanta Ring. I'm not going to test you on the Atlanta Ring. Remember Bourbon Triumvirate, and was very close with politicians like John Gordon and Joe Brown. Henry Grady and his home in Atlanta. He was often attacked by populist Tom Watson, who was one of the other more popular political voices in Georgia at the time. Tom Watson represented more of the poor people in Georgia, whereas the Atlanta Ring and the Bourbons represented more of the wealthy people in Georgia. He did not like the fact that Grady had this industrial focus. He was wanting to bring factories and plants into Georgia. Tom Watson and the farmers wanted the focus to stay on agriculture. Elected official of Georgia's other major cities, such as Athens, Augusta, and Macon, criticized Grady for his blatant bias in favor of Atlanta. In other words, when he portrayed Georgia outside the state of Georgia, he would speak of Atlanta in glowing terms and not so much the other major cities of that time. A lot of civil rights groups in the North and South did not like Grady because he inaccurately portrayed race relations in Georgia in order to bring in Northern investment. What this means is that in his essays and his speeches, he would talk about the fact that the blacks and whites got along in the state, that the blacks were very happy. This was not an accurate portrayal. They would come down here and they would seem happy because a lot of African Americans had basically been bullied, had basically been terrorized into being happy with their state in Georgia. They, for the most part, weren't voting at this point. They had been scared out of the polls by groups like the Klan and terrorization and things like that. Grady, who was a dynamic writer and speaker, had been identified as the most important figure in the New South movement. Even with the drawbacks, he did bring a lot of investment into Atlanta in particular and did help Atlanta to thrive, even though the rest of the state economically was still very much struggling at this point. Only lived to age 39. I think he died of pneumonia at a very young age. He's been honored in several ways throughout the state. He has a county named for him, Grady Hospital in Atlanta named for him, and the University of Georgia's Grady School of Journalism are named in his honor. Arguably, Grady's biggest contribution is the promotion of the International Cotton Exposition, which I talked a little bit about when I introduced the projects to you guys yesterday. We had 3, 81 and 85. Grady was alive for both of those. 1895, he had passed by then. Atlanta was the site of 3 international cotton expositions. These events were similar to World's Fairs, if you've ever studied those before, kind of like a big county fair or a state fair. And what they were designed to do was to bring people from out of the state here, especially from the north, and interest them in investing in the south and bringing their businesses here. Instead of taking trainloads of cotton to the north, build your textile plant here and let our workers make your cloth and dresses and shirts and things like that. These expositions were established to promote Atlanta's rebuilding from the Civil War, its industrial capabilities and accomplishments, and to lure northern investment into the region. The first 2 were heavily promoted by Grady, but the most memorable was the exposition held in 1895 after his death. This is actually a picture. The International Cotton Expositions were held at Piedmont Park. Some of the stone buildings that are still in the park today, I think that maybe, if you've been to Piedmont Park, I think this building down in the forefront might still actually be there. As you can see, this building looks taller than it actually is. This is not a 2-story thing. It's just a big convention exhibition hall, kind of like a mall, which this building's long since been torn down. During the exposition of 1895, this one was known as the Cotton States and International Exposition. It sought to bring in more people from outside the country even. The keynote speech was given by civil rights activist and educator Booker T. Washington. It was here that Washington delivered his Atlanta Compromise speech, which urged African Americans to focus on economic improvement as opposed to political and social rights. In other words, he didn't want them to push for voting rights. He didn't want them to push for, being able to treat equally. He wanted them to work on economic improvement. Washington's theory was that if this is what they focused on, if they were successful in this realm of public life, then the white citizens of the state of Georgia would be more willing and more accepting of them. This idea, you see at the bottom, was supported by New South advocates, but it was not accepted by many black leaders because it wasn't any type of equality. Excuse me. That is today's lesson. Go back into the module and take the 10-question quiz, and you'll be good for the day. I hope you guys enjoy a snow day, and we'll see if we see you tomorrow.